Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has stressed that the foiled armed incursion of May 3rd was a covert operation ordered by US President Donald Trump. China is the first country to report that the risk of the COVID-19 outbreak is now low, as no new local cases have been reported during the past few days. The World Health Organization's Regional Director for Africa stated that the coronavirus is predicted to peak in about 4 to 6 weeks in African countries if more is not done. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, I'm Katrina Goss. In an exclusive interview with Telesur this Thursday, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro stressed that the attempted armed incursion of May 3rd was a covert operation ordered by US President Donald Trump. He also referred to the announcement by the White House that Trump has nominated a new ambassador to Venezuela, James Broward Story, formerly the interim charge d'affaires of the Venezuela Affairs Unit based at the U.S. Embassy in Colombia.
This man, he was the last commercial diplomat in Venezuela. We had to throw him out. He has an office in Bogota, Colombia, and I can tell you, and this will be proven through the declassified documents, that this man is responsible for the failure of this armed incursion that was military defeated in the Bay of Macuto. James Story has his feet and his hands and all of his body in this military incursion. What is Mike Pompeo doing? And Donald Trump, once again, they are giving a prize to the person who failed, because James Story, Elliot Abrams, and Mike Pompeo are responsible for this failure in the Bay of Macuto. And what Trump is doing is to give him an award, to give them prizes. This will be revealed. And Donald Trump forced this attack, and Ivan Duque was also forced by Donald Trump to send this group to see if they were able to kill me and to unleash the violence. And this is what the Americans have declared.
And Venezuelan Vice President for Communications Jorge Rodriguez this Thursday presented footage of the interrogation of Aram Seth Berry, one of the 2 US mercenaries captured on Monday, in which he revealed details of the operation.
Did you know about a document that described the clause of the operation?
Yes, I think so.
How many people did you train?
From what I understand, it's approximately 50 to 60 people.
What is the Silver Corp company in charge of?
It's a private corporation owned by Jordan Boudreaux, and it's about all I understand about that.
What will be your mission after entering Caracas?
To advise the forces that were coming in when they need us, and make our way to the airport as soon as we could.
If someone tried to enter the U.S. with the intention of eliminating Donald Trump, what do you think will be the response of the U.S. government in this case?
They would definitely protect the president.
What were the objectives of the mission?
I believe it was to obtain specific targets and to, I think, get Maduro.
Are you aware that Juan Guaido, in the end, that contract acted illegally, and that it's a crime to sponsor insurgency actions against the people of Venezuela?
I understand that's what you're saying, yes. I understand that's what you're saying, yes. This contract was posted several days ago by Jordan Boudreaux and outlines my responsibilities with Silver Corps, signed by Juan Guaido, Jordan Boudreaux, and one Rendon.
Peru has reported the second highest number of coronavirus cases in South America, behind Brazil. Peru was one of the first countries in the region to implement strict social distancing rules and closed borders just a handful of COVID-19 cases were detected. However, the number of positive cases continues to rise across the country. This Thursday, 3,709 new cases were reported, bringing the total to over 58,000. Meanwhile, over 1,600 COVID-19 fatalities have been reported and more than 18,000 patients have recovered so far. A Brazilian regional court upheld the conviction of former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva to 17 years in prison through a virtual session and denied the appeals presented by his defence. Our correspondent Brian Meir has the details.
In Porto Alegre in southern Brazil, an appeal attempt made by the defense attorneys for former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva was denied. The initial ruling was over alleged cases of corruption involving a vacation property in the town of Itaibaia in São Paulo, owned by the former mayor of Campinas, which is one of the largest cities in Brazil, who is a longtime family friend of the Lula family. Now, despite not having any proof that Lula had ever owned this property, he was sentenced to 17 years by a local court in the city of Curitiba, outside of the case's own jurisdiction in a neighboring state. Now, during the ruling that upheld the 17-year sentence yesterday, the court refused to admit any evidence of the thousands of social media conversations between members of the W.H.O anti-corruption task force, the judge, Sergio Moro, who oversaw the operation, and the judges in the actual 4th Federal Regional Court in Porto Alegre, which would have immediately caused them to throw out all charges. Instead, they held a behind closed doors virtual court session in which they didn't allow any arguments by the defense at all, and there was no jury. So what this means is that Lula still has the right to appeal. He's not going to jail anytime soon. It just shows further evidence that the rule of law has degenerated since the 2016 coup in Brazil.
Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez stressed on Thursday that more than 30,000 Cuban health professionals are currently providing their services across the world. The Foreign Minister posted a world map of Cuban medical cooperation on Twitter, detailing the countries of Africa, the Middle East, Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean and Europe, where Cuban personnel are currently deployed. Rodriguez also stressed that these Cuban professionals are guided by their fraternal and humanist vocation, defending health as a human right. Cuba has sent 25 medical brigades to different countries to assist in the fight against the novel coronavirus pandemic, in addition to the thousands of health professionals already cooperating abroad. Jamaican authorities have facilitated the repatriation of 115 citizens who are stranded abroad due to the restrictions amid the COVID-19 pandemic. 75 crew members from 6 ships, as well as 40 Jamaicans stranded in the United Kingdom, returned home on Wednesday. They'll be placed in quarantine for 14 days. Prime Minister Andrew Holness announced that due to the hardships experienced in the midst of the pandemic, the government will cover the cost of the quarantine arrangements. More stories coming up after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. China is the first country to report that the risk of the COVID-19 outbreak is now low, as no new local cases have been reported during the past few days. According to Ming Feng, spokesperson for the National Health Commission, all the regions of China are now at low risk. The long-awaited announcement issued on Thursday came after the province of Heilongjiang became the last to reduce its risk level, according to local media. Only 2 patients have tested positive for COVID-19 in recent days, both of whom imported the infection from overseas. Around 300 people are still receiving treatment for COVID-19. Beijing officially announced it had defeated the epidemic in early April, stressing that strict quarantine measures had played a decisive role. The number of people killed by COVID-19 in Europe has surpassed 150,000, with the largest number of deaths occurring in the United Kingdom, Italy, Spain and France. In the UK, the Office of National Statistics informed in a recent report that the risk of death from COVID-19 is significantly higher among some black and minority ethnic groups than among white people. According to the office, black men are 4.2 times more likely to die from coronavirus than their white counterparts, and black women 4.3 times more likely. It's clear that the socio-economic factors impacting these mortality rates are fundamental to understanding them, as black and minority ethnic people are more likely to be exposed to the virus due to working in essential sectors that have not stopped during the lockdown. Spain has extended a state of emergency imposed to combat the novel coronavirus pandemic for 2 more weeks from Sunday, allowing the government to control people's movements as it gradually relaxes a national lockdown. Spain, where more than 25,000 people have died from COVID-19, has been under a lockdown since March 14th.
In the last 24 hours, a total of 754 new cases have been reported throughout Spain, an increase of 0.34%. It is the same downward trend that we observed. Yesterday, if I remember correctly, we had a few more cases. Today we return to this downward data with those typical ripples of the tails of epidemics, which fortunately we are already in that phase.
On Thursday, Russia reported another record increase in coronavirus cases at more than 11,000 as Moscow imposes new restrictions and ramps up testing. Russia now ranks 5th in the world in terms of the number of COVID-19 cases reported. The latest figures have brought Russia's total number of cases to over 170,000. The number of cases in Russia has been rising by more than 10,000 cases a day since Sunday. Officials attribute the increase to mass testing and the detection of asymptomatic cases, which are not always counted in other countries. Health officials reported on Thursday they had carried out more than 4.8 million COVID-19 tests. French Prime Minister Edouard Philippe on Thursday confirmed that the government was going to end a strict 2-month lockdown throughout the country on May 11th, even though the coronavirus was still spreading in 4 regions, including Paris. Some important restrictions will remain in place, including on urban public transport, until the situation is reassessed in early June.
The situation in the region of Paris requires greatest vigilance. We call upon companies to ask their employees to work from home as much as possible. We ask the inhabitants of the region of Paris to limit their movement to what is strictly necessary, and we call on the entire population to apply the precautionary measures even more scrupulously. As for the vulnerable people, please limit your trips and contacts with other people to the strict minimum. 80 to 85% of the 50,000 schools in France have announced they will open next week, so a large part of schools will be open next week. It doesn't mean that all the pupils will go back to school. As I said, it will be progressive, especially from May 12th. So for next week, we should have slightly more than 1 million pupils who will go back to their classrooms, and there will be around 130,000 teachers to welcome them.
Millions of people have sought unemployment benefits in the past week across the United States, suggesting that the economic sectors imposing mass layoffs have expanded. According to a report issued by the US Labor Department, the economic crisis triggered by nationwide lockdowns to slow the spread of the coronavirus meant that productivity dropped at its fastest pace in more than 4 years during the first quarter of 2020. The report added that the US economy shrank in the first quarter at the steepest pace since the Great Recession of 2007 to 2009. The same report stressed that initial jobless claims for state unemployment benefits totaled more than 3,000 million for the week that ended on May 2nd. The US unemployment rate jumped to 16% in April. And also in the US, 605 new coronavirus cases were reported on Thursday, taking a total to over 1.2 million, representing close to 1/3 of the COVID-19 cases reported worldwide. Regarding the number of fatalities, the latest figures have brought the death toll to more than 76,000. New York, with over 300,000 cases, and New Jersey, with over 130,000, continue to be the hardest hit states. The state of New York has also reported the highest death toll in the country at more than 26,300. And we're taking one final break now, but stay with us for more. Welcome back to From the South. The World Health Organization's Regional Director for Africa stated that the coronavirus is predicted to peak in about 4 to 6 weeks in African countries if more is not done. Meanwhile, Stephen Karingi of the UN Economic Commission for Africa has stressed that much of the population is struggling to secure enough food in the midst of lockdowns.
We are estimating that, and this is an estimate based on if nothing much was done, we are estimating that this would peak in about 4 to 6 weeks in African countries. We're working with countries to leverage the assets that they already have in place in terms of what was done to prepare for Ebola, some of the equipment for testing that's being used for tuberculosis and polio, and to mobilize people and repair supply chains.
Since 60% of the African population lives in informal settlements, it is becoming very difficult for them to be able to keep to the lockdowns because they need food. They wake up in the morning, go and look for money for the food, and come back, eat their food. Then the next day they go and look for their second meal. Statistic that shows that at least 70% of these people in these urban settlements have actually reported that they have seen an increase in the price of the food that they need to sustain their lives. But much more importantly, 87% of them say that they are either skipping a meal or even eating less.
More than 50,000 cases of the novel coronavirus and over 2,000 deaths have now been reported across the African continent. According to the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the continent has also reported that more than 17,000 people have recovered from the virus. South Africa remains the worst hit nation in terms of the reported figures, with more than 7,800 cases, while Nigeria leads Western Africa with a tally of more than 3,000 cases and over 100 deaths. The tiny nation of Djibouti appears as the worst hit in Eastern Africa, with more than 1,000 cases and a death toll of 3. Meanwhile, the mountainous kingdom of Lesotho, completely surrounded by South Africa, is the only African country that has not reported a single case of COVID-19. Several African nations have lifted some lockdown measures imposed to stem the spread of the coronavirus, despite concerns that a lack of testing means the real numbers remain unknown. President of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Félix Tshisekedi, inaugurated an intensive care unit dedicated to COVID-19 patients at the Kinshasa Medical Center, set to open next week.
We are inaugurating our COVID disease treatment center for patients with the most severe forms of the disease. We will be able to receive the first patients at the beginning of next week, once the setup has been fully installed and the rest of the equipment has been put in place. We are going to see with the CMK, which has come to our rescue in relation to the increase in hospitalization capacity for patients who have COVID-19. We are going to talk with them to see how we can support them in treating patients.
A South African company has come up with isolation pods for use by COVID-19 patients so as to ease a shortage of hospital beds. South Africa has reported the highest number of coronavirus cases on the continent, having surpassed 8,000. More than a quarter have recovered, while over 160 deaths have been reported. South Africa has managed to slow the COVID-19 infection rate, partly thanks to a lockdown the government imposed early on. The company has been given the go-ahead to produce the first 300 isolation pods, which could potentially be a game-changer when treating COVID-19 patients and are in line with the World Health Organization specifications. There's also interest from the United States, the United Kingdom and Saudi Arabia, and the firm could soon start exporting its latest product. The first step of a mass program to repatriate hundreds of thousands of Indians stranded abroad due to the coronavirus pandemic began this Thursday, with 2 flights departing from the United Arab Emirates. India banned all incoming international flights in late March as it imposed one of the world's strictest lockdowns, leaving vast numbers of Indian workers and students stranded abroad. Some 15,000 nationals will be repatriated from 12 countries on planes and naval ships in a huge exercise which saw the Civil Aviation Ministry's website crash on Wednesday as panicked citizens rushed to register. 2 warships are headed for the Maldives and another for the United Arab Emirates, home to a 3.3 million strong Indian community, which makes up some 30% of the Gulf states' population. The consulate in Dubai reported that it alone had received almost 200,000 applications appealing on Twitter for patience and cooperation as India undertakes the massive task of repatriation.
We have these 177 passengers who are flying out from Dubai today, and mostly these are Indian workers who were stuck here. Some had lost their jobs. We have pregnant ladies, we have several elderly people, and we have people who had medical problems. And then, of course, there are some standard students and tourists.
She was a bit old. She was other medical issues also. So that is the reason she passed away day before yesterday. So I had to go back because there is no one else to take care of the family and all. So I made an emergency request to the consulate, Indian consulate, and they have put me in the waiting list. If there is a vacancy, I can fly, otherwise I will have to look for the other flight.
Deadly floods have hit the East African nations of Kenya, Somalia and Rwanda. Flooding as a result of recent heavy rains has killed more than 260 people across East Africa. Kenya has been the hardest hit, with the government reporting almost 200 deaths. According to the Kenyan government, the floods have also washed away 8,000 acres of crops and destroyed vital infrastructure. Meanwhile, in Rwanda, 55 people have died, while 16 have been killed in Somalia. In Uganda, floods have trapped an estimated 200 patients inside a hospital. East African countries have also been hit recently by a locust invasion, in addition to the health crisis sparked by COVID-19. The rainy season normally lasts until June. Today marks the 81st anniversary of the birth of Jose Antonio Abreu, Venezuelan orchestra conductor, pianist and economist, who founded the El Sistema program in 1975 to help Venezuelan kids learn how to play musical instruments and be part of an orchestra. El Sistema was boosted under the Chavez government to become a nationwide network of youth orchestras, choirs and music centres, with its members playing across the world. And we finished this news brief with a performance in tribute to Maestro Abreu by the children of the El Sistema Orchestra in Zulia State. Remember, you can get all the latest news on our website, telesurenglish.net, as well as on social media. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching and enjoy the music.